thank you very much for inviting me out. I'm going to run through the basics of setup and suspension, both visually and where settings actually go, so you can actually see it. Some of you will be pushing on the bike to make it work and understand the principles of leverage, because some will be able to do it, some won't. And then we'll also use a zip tie on one leg to show the difference between compression damping of full in, full out, and how much extra stroke you can create by doing that. I had sent a sheet, emailed a sheet out with basic information. Why do you set up sag, what numbers and stuff like that. So I'll go through that now so we can actually understand how that's going to apply to something like this. Basically, if you're looking for a street bike, you want an 1.5 to 2 inches on the front forks and 1.5 inches in the rear. A race bike, 1.25 inches in the front and 1 1/8 inches, somewhere around there. Now obviously if the springs won't allow you to set the sag that way, there's a problem. If you have to crunch the spring down, it's too soft, and if you dial it all out and there's no preload on the spring's too stiff. So before you do anything else, you've got to try and set sag, and if sag cannot be done accurately with the springs somewhere in the mid-range, you've got to replace the spring. All the other hydraulic stuff is dependent actually on sag being set. So that being said, this we're going to use kind of a visual in terms of what we do and why we do it. Once sag's been set, really the most important part about that is actually balancing the chassis with rebound. So the rising rate in response to a bump is the same front and back. So the good thing about doing this is it's all visual. You can physically see it both in the shock and the forks, and we're going to start with the forks. So right now we've got some Öhlins 25 cartridges in this, and what I'm going to do is actually bounce them. They're set at 14 clicks from all the way out, and if you want to get in a system, always 0 to the right and count back, because then it's a constant on everything you do. Obviously with a shock, that's going to be a problem, because the rebound you're going to have to 0, literally to 0, which is screwing it up to the top. So people get confused by that because you're turning it counterclockwise as you look at it at 90 degrees. So what we've got to look for on the rebound is the fork actually going down, coming up, and not going into a second and third bounce. Now this fork is stone cold. The oil's probably pretty thick, so let's see how many bounces I can get out of it. Probably 3, 3.5, and this is stone cold. So what we want to do is adjust that. Now we know that it's set at 14 out, and dependent on the valving inside of this cartridge, it's either going to be 2 out or 9 out. And Öhlins are the same. So if this is a Superbike kit, we'll find out right away when I push at 2 out. It'll either stop dead at the bottom of the stroke, or it'll come straight back up. So this has got the Superbike kit in it. So it should sit somewhere around 9 out. Either 9 out or 2 out, depending on the cartridge kit that you put in. Now this is a 25mm kit, not the 20. So this usually comes valved this way. So what we want to do is have it come up and bounce over the top into a second stroke. That's it. Obviously when the bike gets hot, the oil thins out, so it's going to rebound faster, so we may have to go back another couple of clicks. So you can see this falls into a second stroke, and that's cold. So we're at 9 out right now. So we'll go to 7. And now when it hits a bump, it just comes up and quits. Now this may probably go down to 5 or less, depending on the rider. And a lot of that you can tell from the tire wear. Once a session's been going and the rider's got 10, 15 laps, the tire wear will show you whether something's wrong or not. So in this instance now, we know with the forks cold, we're going to start somewhere around 7 out. Some riders want the front end to work, So as an individual rider, you've got to go out and try stuff. Set it in a range where you know it's stable, make it unstable, and make it too stable where it won't fully rebound back up. The problem with that is if you load the front going into a corner, all the weight's on the front and the front end won't rebound. So you have a possibility or a tendency to the front to push, which is not a good feeling for anybody on a bike when you want it to turn and it's still going this way, simply because the rebound is holding the bike down. But an easy way to evaluate whether you are in the ballpark is actually pushing on the bike like this. So that's 7. Let's push it back out to 14. So Rick, why don't you come out and push it and see how many you can get out of it.
With the brake on?
Brake on, all your body weight into it. Looks pretty good. One more. Okay, thanks. So you can see how important leverage is on pushing on the bike. If you can't create the downforce in the suspension, the valving's not going to work the same. So with Rick pushing on it there, we got pretty good looking action. But I can get it through 3 bounces. So the problem is you really have to leverage the bike to see what it's physically going to do before it goes out on the track. So, any questions on rebound and why you set it up that way? Obviously, what you're trying to do is balance the chassis. So, on the compression side, the zip tie is on to show how much travel we got. Now, we're at the stock setting of 6 clicks out, which is pretty damn stiff in these forks. So we'll move the zip tie and reset it, and I'm going to put it to 2 out. Currently on my race bike, it's 3 out, but we're racing on a very high G-load track. So let's see how far I can get the O-ring to go down. Okay, so that's about, what, 1/3 of the way, roughly. Now in setting bikes up for the track, there's 2 things you're looking for with this zip tie. If somebody trail brakes into the corner, they want to get almost everything they possibly can get out of the front forks. The lower it goes, the easier it turns because it collapses down on the brakes and turns quickly. Someone that brakes, lets go of the brakes, and then turns the bike wants the front end stable as quickly as possible so they can turn the bike in. So 2 completely different setups with compression. For a trail brake, obviously we want as much as we can get out of that. So right now, as you can see, pushing hard on it, it's even too stiff for someone that brakes, let go, and then initiates the turn. So you want to work, if that's your riding style, 2/3 to 3/4. If you actually do physically brake all the way to the apex and transfer the gas, in this bike we can't bottom it out because it's 17 millimeters up from the axle casting is true bottom. So bikes have idiosyncrasies. There's not many, but this is one of them. So you have to figure out what your riding style is and then know how much travel you need. That way you can use the zip tie. As you improve, you can see the zip tie moving further and further down the fork leg and then adjust the compression and or the spring accordingly based on that distance. So let's set this all the way out and see how much further we can get that zip tie down. Now the beauty of this is basically feel for the rider. If we have a rider that wants a lot of feedback through the front end, you don't want it to be stiff. Something like a Ben Bostrom bike, which is really soft in the front, causes the back to wander a lot. It's because the front end collapses quickly, transfers the weight to the front wheel, so then he can feel what the chassis is doing as it moves. Personally, I can't deal with that. It's too much information. So on my race bike, it's more evenly balanced because I race TZ250s. It's all about corner speed, not getting the bike in and turn quickly, hit the gas and go. Very, very different setups. And with the adjustability, of the front end, you can pretty much make any setup you want. Okay, so let's see how much further we can get this. Quite a bit. What, double? And that's just from pushing by hand. So you can imagine on the track, once you've actually changed the compression settings, you're actually going to get a lot more feel by softening the bike up. Again, you can only soften it up enough where you get the correct amount of travel out of the front forks. Because if you get too much, it's not going to turn, it won't steer, and you'll have numerous problems with the front end. If you don't trust the front, you're in a world of hurt because you can't go fast. Unless you're an old motocrosser and you just steer with a rear tire anyway, and the front is just there to keep two wheels on the ground, it doesn't matter. And there's quite a few setups like that too, where you have a completely wrong number set up for the front, it collapses, the back end swings right around, and away they go again. That's the beauty of this job. You get to meet so many racers with different skills and setup needs, and then you physically design an individual setup for that person and their riding style. So this, as a tool, is incredibly useful, even for you as an individual when you're riding on the track, to see how much travel you're using, and then balance the chassis out. Now, common problems while we're on the front. Obviously, if rebound is not adjusted correctly, you're going to have two things. One, we already mentioned, the front end coming down, staying still, and going the wrong direction because all the weight's on the front. What someone would call plowing or just not turning. It won't turn, which sounds really stupid because you're turning into the corner, but it won't turn because there's too much weight on the tire skids, the bike plows. If that happens on this side of the tire, about this section, on both sides, you will get a tear pattern that follows the perimeter of the tire or the circumference. And there's 3 or 4 rings that go around the outside. You know then that there's too much weight on the front wheel. How do you figure that out? Well, you can look at the zip tie and see if the forks are bottomed. If they're bottomed, it's a no-brainer. Put some more spring in it, pick the front end up. If it's geometry where the bike is too steep because the forks are too far through, or somebody threw a 195 on the rear to just jack the bike out, then you can look at what happened to the bike and figure out why it won't turn. So that's really important. Some chassis won't take the bigger tire unless you move the axle all the way to the back. And we'll get onto tires afterwards in kind of the general thing. And then secondly, if the rebound is bouncing, as you go into a corner, whether it's street or track, it doesn't matter, you will feel the front end doing this. And until such time as you get on the throttle and transfer the weight away from that front wheel, you'll still have that sensation. So as soon as you crack the throttle, it'll go away. And a lot of people say that's a pogo, where the thing just bounces up and down until the chassis either evens itself out in a long corner, or you get on the gas and balance the chassis out using the bike that way. Those are the two biggest problems that you'll find with the front end if it's adjusted wrong. But the most predominant is rebound. If you don't balance it, it's really going to be ugly.